Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Steven. This is Northwest Small Batch Brewing. And today, as the title of the video says, I want to talk about a question that I've seen come up, which is how long can you store beer, or how long should you store beer? And this is one of those questions I don't think there's any one perfect answer. It really has a lot of dependencies, and so of course, if you have any suggestions or advice to answer this question, look down and put them in the comments. And while you're down there, you might as well hit the subscribe button that's down there as well. That way you can help support my channel and get notified when I put out my next video. So, first of all, cheers. Salud. So let's just talk about some of the stuff that, that could affect this. So the type of beer, right? Let's start with IPAs, because that seems the most obvious to me, right? IPAs have a lot of hops, or any really hoppy beer, right? Has a lot of hop or hop matter in the beer. And you may or may not be aware, but when we say a beer gets oxidized, 99% of the time, we're talking about the hops. That's like vegetal matter, right? And that's what is affected by sunlight and oxygen. So this is also why you'll oftentimes see a sell-by date or drink-by date on IPAs that you buy like at the store. And I've even seen some people go so far as to just flat out not buy a beer that's on the shelf in the store. If you're an IPA person and that's your thing, it makes a difference, because the longer it sits there, the more oxidized those hops become, and it becomes more like a stale, paper baggy kind of flavor. So the point is, IPAs should not be aged. They just don't age well. No reason to really do it. All right. Let's talk about other styles of beer that maybe you would want to age. So high ABV beers, right? Alcohol content. So the beer itself doesn't change too much over time. I'm going to make a generalization and say most beer does not really change, if you cellar it for like a year or whatever, however much time. What changes is the alcohol. Like when it's a high ABV, the alcohol is going to mellow, and it won't have that bite, maybe that, or as much of that as it would have like in the beginning. And the same thing can happen with some off flavors. Sometimes, especially if you cellar it at a temperature where the yeast could still be active, at least a little bit, you can end up having some, off flavors get reabsorbed and scrubbed out, that were there initially, which would help clean up the beer, make it taste better. But I stand by what I'm saying. It doesn't really change the beer itself so much. I don't know if that makes sense. But so high ABV beers. So we're talking like stouts that are high, like imperial stouts would be good. Like high alcohol stouts that are barrel aged, barley wines, wheat wines, Belgian beers, a lot of times are higher ABV. There are some Belgian beers, I think, that specifically say, just don't open this bottle for like at least a year. And there's good reason for that. So there are some beers that can stand to be aged. Some of what affects that is, for example, how you store the beer, right? If you're storing the beer in a refrigerator, like a cold, really cold, I'm talking like, let's say, I'm going to say, I'll put it up on the screen in Celsius, but let's say 35, 40, I don't know, whatever, Fahrenheit, somewhere in the 30 to 38 Fahrenheit range. Probably not going to get much change in the beer, because you're keeping everything dormant when you do that. However, if you put it in a cool place that's like at room temperature, let's say 68 to 70 degrees, and you can kind of maintain that overall temperature for like a year, maybe not even a year, I'm just throwing that out there, then some of these beers, especially the higher ABV ones, will benefit. So how you store the beer affects whether or not it's even worth letting it age or sit there. How you bottle it. So are you bottling it, or are you putting it in a keg? And then how are you storing that keg or bottle, right? So the bottom line is the same thing, right? If it's in a keg, as long as it's sealed under pressure, you should be fine, just like it would be if it was in a bottle. But you still need to store that keg in that same sort of temperature range. And if you're bottling, it's the same thing, right? You've got to find a place to store those bottles where they can condition. When I say condition, right? So you don't want them to be too cold. You don't want it to be too hot either, right? There's still yeast in our homebrew. If it's too hot, that can also adversely affect it. So that's one of the main considerations. If you're going to age beer, do you have a way to do it in a way that's like a temperature controlled way? You have air conditioning or something like that. No, oxygen also helps. Now, if you're bottling beer, you're putting priming sugar in it, and theoretically it's going to scrub the oxygen that might have gotten into the beer out. It's not a 100% guarantee, but so if you're kegging and you're going to age it, you'd be best, I think, to try and not introduce any oxygen. So if you're going to take it off the yeast cake, which you should do if you're going to age it, move it into a secondary vessel. That secondary vessel, you want to try to do a no or zero oxygen transfer if you can, so that you're not introducing any oxygen into it for that long-term aging. I was going to say something else, and it was in the back of my mind, and now it sort of poof. You ever have that happen? It's old age. Let me think. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So, basically, not just should you age your beer, but how long? My personal opinion, and this is totally up for debate, there's nothing written in stone about this, but I feel like 1 year is that's it. I think that anything more than a year old is going to start having diminishing returns, meaning it's just really not going to benefit from longer aging. And at some point, it's going to start going down the backside of that curve. And instead of being, beneficial, it's going to be having negative effects if it's aged too long. So I feel like 1 year for a high ABV beer is probably about right. I mean, it's not written in stone, so if it's a little more, a little less, fine, big deal. But I'm just saying, that's my personal opinion on it. I mean, I do know people who have opened a beer that's been sitting in a cellar for 20 years. And usually the response was, I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't nothing good, just So, at any rate, I don't know if that answered the question. Tell me in the comments, how long do you think you should age beer? And when should you age beer? What kind of beer and that sort of thing. Hey, thanks for stopping by, watching my little video. I will be back again probably in a week with something else. And until then, keep on brewing. Salud.